This meeting. As a county board, we have talked about infrastructure at length, not only for county, but for all the villages. And we had ARPA money that we tried to dole out in various ways to some of the villages. But this was a project that Reagan was really fired up about. And for various reasons, she can't be here tonight. So I'm going to pinch hit for her. And I'll make the introduction to our presenters tonight, and we'll turn it over to them. Steve McNulty is the SRF Section Supervisor for the Planning and Aid Division of the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. He oversees all financial assistance programs for the funding of water and wastewater infrastructure. He has worked primarily in the drinking water program for the past 15 years and guided the response to the agency's March 2019 flood disaster for major water infrastructure needs. As a reward, he is now to implement water and wastewater funding made available to Nebraska under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the SRF section is no longer just the state revolving fund. In addition to the clean water and drinking water SRF grant programs, now include the OSG, sewer overflow and stormwater reuse municipal grants, lead remediation, reimbursement of grants for removing lead piping or faucet fixtures, fountains, public schools, licensed child daycare facilities, along with the American Rescue Plan Act funding for the private reverse osmosis systems in rural residents with nitrites above 10 ppm. If you understood all of that, you are far and away better than I am. I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Steve and let him go forth with his presentation, and I'll let him introduce his staff. Go ahead, Steve. It's all yours.
Hi, everybody. I'd like to apologize. There wasn't more for that introduction for John Danforth and Lisa Giesbrecht. Lisa will be an observer here tonight. She's going to be joining you in the audience. John volunteered, I think, technically on Wednesday to show up here tonight and present with me. So this was his presentation, and he gave at a Carney conference. He's better suited at doing it than I would have been doing it off the cuff. So before we get started, do any of you have any questions?
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Danforth. I am an environmental specialist with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. Basically serve as a project manager for the SRF program. I help assist communities with their projects that do receive SRF funding, helping them navigate through kind of the red tape that's both the federal and state requirements that come along with SRF, and then working just with the SRF program in general, as well as some of the other grant programs. So it's great to be here with you guys tonight. Thank you so much for attending and coming and joining us. My presentation here is a little bit, if you were at the recent fall conference of the AWWA, the joint conference, and sat in, this might look very familiar. This is very similar to the presentation I gave there. But basically, the presentation I have for you guys tonight to start it off is just an introduction into the State Revolving Fund program. What it is that we do, some of the updates to our program in the last year. We'll talk a little bit about what type of projects the SRF does fund, as well as the funding options available that are currently on our intended use plan this year. We'll move then into some of the common things you can expect if you do have SRF funding for your project. Some of the things that are a little bit different than maybe if you went to another source for funding, such as private funding, and explain some of the things that we do and why certain rules or requirements are attached to the SRF funding. And then at the end of this presentation, there'll be some information if you want to continue the conversation moving forward. There'll be some contact information for that and how to keep the conversation kind of going, as well as contacts for questions if you have any. This presentation I know has been approved, so I can, I can give this out. So if anyone would like a copy of this, you can, contact me, let me know. I'd be happy to provide a presentation or a copy of this to you guys via email after this. So, and after my presentation, I know Steve McNulty will be following up with a presentation on lead, I believe, and lead services. So, With that, we'll jump into the SRF. What is the State Revolving Fund Program? Just out of a quick show of hands, how many of you guys in here are familiar or have at least heard of the SRF? Okay, so a fair amount. So some of this is kind of going to be new information for you. Well, what is the SRF? It's basically, you boil it down to its most simplistic statement. It's a partnership between federal and state funding for communities to help provide funding for wastewater drinking water projects. And so it's a program that provides financing in the form of grants and below market interest rates to communities to help address infrastructure. If any of you are NET watchers, you may have seen a commercial come up late at night a couple of years ago. But we have ads running to kind of help promote the SRF program, just to provide information. And these videos here do a pretty good job of kind of condensing down into a very quick explanation of what each program is. So the state of Nebraska, there are two programs. There's the Clean Water SRF, or CWSRF, and then there's the Drinking Water SRF. Each one, they're very similar, but they are their own unique entity and have their own set of rules and standards that they follow from. And so we kind of, it's easy for me to lump them both together, but they, we will be going over each one as, its own separate thing tonight as well. So I'll start off with the Clean Water SRF video. Do apologize, the volume is a little low, but I think we did a test and I could hear it all the way back up there. So I apologize if it's a little faint up there, but you should be able to hear it.
What happens to your wastewater? The Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy can help your community maintain and upgrade wastewater treatment facilities. The NDEE has technical assistance, short and long-term financing, and grants that help communities update facilities. This helps keep streams safe and usable for recreation and maintain the natural environment. The NDEE, everyone living, working, and enjoying a healthy Nebraska environment. For more information, dee.ne.gov.
So everyone able to hear that okay, or at least some, okay, cool. Last time I presented it, it was very small in the front, so it's just me kind of standing up there for a minute of silence. So want to make sure if we can hear it, then we can keep going. If not, I can skip it. This is for the drinking water program.
For their drinking water, the Nebraska Department of Environmental Quality works with local utilities to ensure that communities have a sustainable, reliable, and safe source of drinking water today and in the future. The NDEQ offers below market financing to help communities maintain and improve local water delivery infrastructures, helping to provide safe drinking water to the citizens of Nebraska. For more information, deq.ne.gov.
So kind of the SRF programs in a nutshell there and what they're focusing on. How does it work exactly? As I mentioned, it's a partnership between both federal and state. And so every year, Congress provides an appropriation of funding for the SRF programs that go out to all the United States. Each state has their own unique SRF program. Each one is kind of tailored to address the needs in that particular state. So our state, Nebraska, has our very own unique and distinct SRF programs. While if you go over to the border of Iowa or Kansas, theirs are going to be similar, but they're going to be run different in how things are going. So each one's kind of its own snow globe and unique way in how it runs. But every year, Congress appropriates funds, EPA takes those funds, and then they divvy it out to all the states. The states provide a match for that, one for clean water, one for drinking water. Those funds go into the SRF program, which is overseen by the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. And then they go out again in the form of loans and grants to communities. And on the loans, they are repaid back over time. And so we kind of get that revolving nature where the funds come back into the program and then go right back out. So it kind of builds on itself and keeps going. Now, one of the things that we've been really busy with in the last year or so is a little thing you might have heard, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law. This was signed back in 2021, and we're still kind of rolling things out, still getting things and moving forward with what has happened since 2021. And one of the big things that bill did was it created a whole bunch of new pots of financing and new opportunities, new avenues, new projects available through government funds. And on the wastewater side, we had a lot of new funding come down for the general program, and as well as a new program for emerging contaminants. So We've heard the talk about PFAS in the water. Emerging contaminants is part of that conversation. On the drinking water side, we had similar things, new pots of funding becoming available for the general program for drinking water, its own emerging contaminants program, as well as a lead service line program that became available thanks to Bill. But with all things, it also came with its own attachments of red strings, and so there's some additional changes and requirements that have come down with these fundings. And so this wave of new funding is kind of what we've been dealing with in the last year, helping getting it out and understanding these new requirements. Now, two of the ones that affect SRF specifically that I'll touch on tonight is one is a requirement for signs that come along with bill funds, and the other one is the requirement for Build America, Buy America. I'll get into both of these a little bit later on, explain in more detail what those are. But for now, we can move on to what type of things are eligible under the SRF. So what are the things we can fund with our program? On the wastewater side, we can do a lot of different things with wastewater treatment facilities. We can do primary, secondary, all different sorts. We can do lift stations. We can do new collector sewer and different things for appurtenances. And then we can also acquire land integral to the treatment process. That also includes land application. So for lagoons that have a land apply, that can be something that's funded under SRF. It's also able to do more outside of just the wastewater components. We can touch on non-point source projects. We can also fund for the development and implementation of watershed projects, and so it's kind of very robust and diverse program on the wastewater side, so it kind of stretches and goes a lot of different places. I think, and one of the other ones too to mention is that it can also fund for stormwater related projects as well in communities. One of the new eligible items under bill that came through is the emerging contaminants. As mentioned, this is things like your PFAS and different chemicals that are coming up through the EPA as listed as an emerging contaminant. That's a new funding source and eligible item under the Clean Water SRF. Under the drinking water side, this is for your public water systems. So things like water towers, your water meters, your lines, transmission and distribution, blending wells, joining up with counties and the rural water systems, a whole bunch of different avenues on the public water system side as well. And likewise, the eligible projects, something new is the emerging contaminants on the drinking water side. I will add that there's kind of a little bit more focus on the drinking water side of emerging contaminants than the wastewater side, making sure that the human health factor is targeted first, and that we're addressing that issue more than the wastewater side. Also, with the bill funding, there came the lead service lines. This is funding for infrastructure replacement, lead testing and education, and also new interim and emergency protocols. So histories of things that happened before, that hopefully won't occur again. And if it does, our responses can be much different than what has occurred in the past. And so that's kind of just a very broad look of all the eligible items that are available under the SRF. We can kind of get into more nitty gritty or kind of answer if certain things are eligible or not if you contact us. But how do we fund those? Well, we have two primary vehicles for funding for SRF projects. They are SRF grants and they have SRF loans. Before we get into either of those, I do need to bring up the intended use plan. Now, the intended use plan is the SRF program's playbook. It's our guide for the entire year. It runs through the state fiscal year from July 1st to June 30th of the next year. It's basically our whole program and what we're going to do. It goes into detail as to what funding we have available, the rules for that funding, how we're going to implement projects and funding, and what projects we plan to fund in the coming year. And so everything we have is listed in the IUP. And so everything I'm about to go over, there's a lot more information there. I know it's not the greatest for light reading, but if it's something anything that catches your eye or say, oh, that's interesting, like to know more information, I encourage directing it to the IUP so you can kind of read up the full write-out as to what is available. So if you want to find it, we do have some physical copies. They're limited, but we can, provide a couple physical copies. But we prefer to point people to our website, which has an electronic copy of the intended use plan. So if you go to our website, dee.ne.gov, you'll see on the very top here, there's a couple of tabs. You'll want the Publications and Form tab, which will give you a drop down here of a whole bunch of different categories to look for. And you'll want to find one that says either Clean Water or Drinking Water Safe Revolving Fund. And then after that, you'll see a drop down menu under that for annual reports. And if you scroll down far enough, you'll eventually find it. Now, I wish I could say there was an easier way. You could try using a browser or search engine, but I can't guarantee that it's going to bring up the most recent IUP. And it's important that if you are looking to see what's available, that you are going with the most recent intended use plan, because it does change from year to year. And so we have things that were offered a couple years back that are no longer offered, and likewise new grants and new programs that are offered now in the IUP. So this is kind of the best way, or if you're interested, just give us like an email or a call, and we can provide you with the latest one as well. All right, so talk about funding. Grants for the CWSRF, we have a couple of them, but as with you can expect with most grants, they are rather limited in how much we have available, and the competition for them can be in high demand for these grants. But we have a list of them, and I kind of like this bubble projection of them because this kind of gives a good idea, because each grant in my own mind is its own entity. It has its own set of rules and eligibility, how it's run, when it goes out. Each one is kind of different in its own right. And so, it's like, I wish I could say all these grants, have the same application date, or they go out at the same time, or they have the same person. They don't. Each one kind of goes to a different person, or different, has a different setting and time or eligibility requirements. If you look in the IUP, there's two more that are listed under grants, under the wastewater side. I view these as kind of like they are grant adjacent or very close to grant cousins. The first one is the Sewer Overflow and Stormwater Reuse Municipal Grant. It's a mouthful. I like to just say OSG. So the OSG for short is a new grant. It's run through the personnel of the SRF, but its pot of funding is a little different. It's coming out of a different grant than the SRF program is. But they designed it to be very similar to the SRF, so that's why it's it's still a grant. It's just a little different than SRF grants. And then the Green Project Reserve is a little different in its own right, which I'll get to in just a second. So looking at the table here, this kind of just breaks down each one of those grants. And like I said, the IUP will have all this information and more. So if you want to look for it. But basically, you can see the grant and point out the eligibility. Each grant has its own requirements as to what makes it eligible for community to receive that grant. And so some of them, a lot of them do depend upon the municipality being less than 10,000. Some of them also require that that community is showing serious financial hardship. So each grant condition has its own set of unique criteria. For the first grant, Project Planning Activities and Report Grant, or PPAR, that's a grant for communities that basically assists in the development and execution of a facility plan, or PER, for a project. Kind of help get the gears turning for a new project on the wastewater side. The NIT, or New and Innovative Technology Grant, that is a grant that's specifically kind of very generalized for any noteworthy new technology. If a community is trying to do something cutting edge or something that's never been done before, it may fall into this category. So we want to try to promote that in the states. That's what we kind of have this set aside grant for new and innovative technology. We also have that OSG grant. That is a grant relatively new that is for the addressing of CSOs, combined sewer operations, and SSOs, as well as stormwater management issues. So that's kind of a relatively new one that we're just kind of rolling out. We also have a grant program for emergency assistance, so communities that have an emergency, natural disaster, or unexpected event that creates an emergency scenario. There is grant assistance available for that. And then the final one is that GPR, the Green Project Reserve. And So, like I said, this one's a little different. It's not direct grant funds right to a community. What it is, it's more of a loan interest reduction. And so it is something that pairs with a loan that goes out for a community, but if it has a green component for it, it can reduce the interest rate on the loan up to 0.5%. And I know that doesn't sound like much, and it's not as fun as talking about free money with grants, but if you think about, you know, a wastewater project, if it's running it in the upward amounts of $1 million or more, and you're paying 30 years on it, 0.5% compounded on that time could be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that the community does not have to pay back. Where if they didn't have that, they would still have to pay. So sometimes these are things that, you know, can really assist a community, sometimes pay for themselves, and it's something we are trying to encourage wastewater communities that they can implement a green component into it. It could mean money savings for a community. Drinking water side, it's very similar. Each one is its own little bubble. The drinking water has its own grants, some similar to the wastewater, some very different. We have the planning grant, which is very similar to that PPAR grant from the wastewater side, where it's just for the preliminary engineering report or a facility plan for a public water system project. The public water system security grant is a grant for increasing or adding in security measures for a public water system. This can include things like cameras, fencing, lighting, different electronics or software that protect your system from possible viruses or Trojans or outside influences. So it's kind of a broad spectrum of a grant, but if it deals with the security for a public water system, it may be able to fall under that grant condition. I know many of these grants that I'm listing right now, some of them are listed on the NDEE website. So if you search for, on the web browser, that particular grant, you might be able to find more information on each specific one. Other grants include the Source Water Protection Grant. These are grants for protecting and improving the source water quality for communities across Nebraska. There's also usually an education component involved in these source water grant. And then the new grant is the, thanks to Bill, is the Emerging Contaminant Baseline Sampling Grant. And this is a 100% grant that's used for the testing of 29, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, did they increase it, Steve? I think they added another chemical to that list, so it's 30 now, isn't it?
We are only doing testing of the 29, but if they do regulate the 30th element, it will be added into the program for the second round of the testing.
Gotcha. Okay, so 29 for right now. But 29 potential PFAS emerging contaminants issues that this bill, this grant can address and test for in a system. And so that's the grant side of things. As mentioned, it's a very limited spectrum of funds. It is usually a competitive field, so they usually go out when they do go out pretty quickly and are scooped up. The kind of the bread and butter that the SRF program does is in the below market loans. And so we do a lot of loans for communities. I know it's not as glamorous as a grant, but compared to the market options out there, as well as the combination of what we have called loan forgiveness, it can be, I'm saying this from as a money guy from my perspective, just as exciting as grants. I know it doesn't feel like it, but it can be. So loans can be provided for all the eligible items that we've listed here today. And then the other thing that communities may qualify for on the loan side is something called loan forgiveness. And so if a community qualifies for loan forgiveness, there's a whole bunch of criteria that we put in the IUP that makes it qualified and how much percentage of loan forgiveness it is. What that effectively means is that at the end of the loan or at the end of the project, that is a portion of the loan you do not have to pay back. So if you're a community that has $1 million project and qualifies for 50% loan forgiveness, that's $500,000, that's yours. You don't have to pay that back. Doesn't collect interest, doesn't collect admin fee, it's yours. So you effectively have, it's kind of like a grant, but it's, in its own way, it's different, but it still functions as a cost-saving value for communities. One of the things I will add is that funding is limited even on the loan side of things. As much as we, wish we had unlimited resources, they are a finite amount. And so most years we have enough funds to go around, but There's always the possibility that if we have enough interest, enough projects are coming in, a combination of project costs are increasing more than what was expected. It all could lead to kind of a limited amount of resources. And so how we select projects is that projects come into us via a needs survey into the IUP. And in that IUP, there is a priority ranking list that ranks each of the projects. And so I know one of the areas that the SRF tends to focus on in the ranking system is compliance issues. And so if a community is having some compliance-based issues, whether they are about to go out of compliance or they're out of compliance and need to come back into it, that can usually score a community higher. So if funds do get limited, it's very possible that we may be only addressing compliance-related projects, and all other projects will have to wait for their full possibility of funding in the year to come or so. So just kind of as early heads up, we're kind of seeing that trend and how things are going. We're watching it, but like I said, it's just something to keep in mind and kind of give the early warning sounds on if any community is concerned about that. So SRF loan terms, and this is, I know the date up here says November 1st, is good for today as well. But as of today, you can get, for clean water, you can get a loan up to 30 years with an interest of about 1.3%. Eligible communities can qualify for up to 60% loan forgiveness. Drinking water side, you can, if a community qualifies, can go up to 40 years repayment, the same interest rate. And certain projects and communities can qualify for up to 75% loan forgiveness. We also have loans available. Excuse me. We have a smaller loan for planning loans. So this would be like if a community is more interested in maybe testing the waters, see if they need to do a project or if they want to start, establishing a facility plan or a PER on an upcoming project. There is a loan and financing available for that. It's a short-term loan up to 5 years, but it has 0% interest, 0.5% admin fee. And the other benefit of doing a planning loan is that if a community does choose to move forward into a construction part and actually start doing an actual project, they can roll that into an SRF loan. So they have a planning loan and they move on to a construction loan. They can all be combined into one, and they'll get all the benefits from the SRF loan from the planning loan. The other type of loan we can offer is a lead service line replacement loan. This is relatively new. This is up to 40-year loan with 0% interest and admin fee. And communities and projects could qualify for up to 72% loan forgiveness on that one. The last one is emergency project loans, and this one is more of a bridge loan. So if a community experiences an emergency, let's say, for example, a flood happens, and FEMA comes in, declares it, this is a natural disaster, and they qualify for FEMA funds, and they're going to get FEMA grant funds. Anyone who's worked with FEMA before knows it can take a while sometimes for those funds to actually make it to the community. So sometimes communities have to wait for those funds to come through, and they may not have the availability to wait months and however long for FEMA to come in. And so what SRF can do is we can provide a bridge loan. And so we can provide an emergency loan for a community up to 40 years. It's going to be at 0% interest, 0% admin fees, so there's no additional fees that are tacked on to that project. And then as soon, when FEMA does come in and is able to give the community the grant funds, the community then can turn around and pay that loan right away. And if they need more funds than what FEMA is awarding, then the SRF can collaborate and provide the funds needed so communities can get back up on their feet and keep moving forward from emergency situations. But best way to think of that is a bridge financing. So those are all the things that the SRF can fund and how we fund them. Now, if a community did go with an SRF, what are some of the things that you could expect? Well, in my mind, I kind of break down the process into 3 phases. You have the application phase for a project, you have the loan and construction portion of the project, and then you have when the project's completed and the project enters repayment. Now the application phase, the very first thing that needs to happen before any other thing is that needs survey needs to come in. And so the needs survey, I mentioned it a little bit earlier, it's our It's a needs survey from communities that basically lists out a community's need for their wastewater and drinking water systems. And it goes into our intended use plan, and it's kind of, we create a list of all the projects needed. But as I mentioned, if it's not in the IUP, it's very challenging for us to be able to provide funding. So this is our way to get communities and their projects into the IUP, is by completing this needs survey. And so going into more detail about that, it's also, I know I said it's not just, I mentioned a needs survey is kind of the needs of community. It also can be a wish list, things that the community may want to do in the next year or two. Not necessarily the things it needs, but also can serve as the things it wants. One of the concerns I have heard from communities in the past is that there's been just concerns that it may obligate a community to do the project or go with SRF funding. It does not. There's no obligations when this form is turned in. It doesn't commit the community for anything. All it does is that it's information gathering. It's helping the SRF plan and see what funding is needed throughout our state and how we can prioritize funding to the places that need it the most. So it's really helpful for us to be able to gather that information. It helps communities because it gets them into that ranking system. And the big thing is that it just kind of overall helps plan for the next year for the SRF. We used to ask for it every year, one for clean water, one for drinking water. That's since been changed. It's now every other year that we're asking for it. It's going to be on the odd years. So right now, it's a year to submit needs surveys. So we already have sent out, emails and notifications to communities asking for them to turn in their needs surveys. Hopefully, if this looks familiar to you and you guys have seen it, then great, and you turned it in. If not, the due date is January 15th. Yes.
One that comes out in October, that's mailed out usually or emailed out in October?
Yes. Yeah. Nicely. Did it go out in October this year? Or was it okay? I know it's like about mid-October. I think it went out. So yeah. So that is the one that goes out, and so it is now electronic form too. And there's been another change. So if this, we have combined the forms. So instead of clean water and drinking water, it's just combined into one form. So now you only have to submit one if you want to. There is options available, so if you're only in charge of the wastewater side or drinking water side, you can click an option and it basically deactivates half of it, so you can still turn in just one if you're not in charge of both systems. But as mentioned, the current due date is January 15th, 2024. That's a very important date. And just pointed out, so in case anyone who hasn't, submitted it yet, it's in before then, because if not, it's very possible then that project may not receive any ranking points on that project. And as mentioned earlier, ranking points are kind of important, especially if we're looking at a year where funding might be limited. So to ensure you're getting the full scope around, check out the IUP for more information on that ranking system, and also get it in before January 15th. All right, so let's say you're in the needs survey. What next? Well, the next one will be filling out the pre-application. In the pre-application form, there is a note for wastewater projects. If you are interested in doing any sort of wastewater project, a new requirement from the federal side of funding has come down, requiring that wastewater projects have to conduct an architect and engineering procurement process in the selection of their engineer. So if any of you have worked on, construction bid contracts, you kind of know the procurement process there is you have to send out bids or send out advertisements, get the bids in for contract work. The same requirement goes for A&E procurement. And so it's similar, there's a whole set of different rules, but that condition has to be met for communities to fully qualify for the full scope of funding. If that condition isn't met, that could limit, if not only limit, but possibly disqualify them from certain funding on SRF side. So before any engineer work is done on a wastewater project, we highly encourage communities to contact us, let us know. We will help walk you through the steps needed to make sure you don't miss that step. So that's my little advisement for the wastewater side. But after that, once you get an engineer and you're ready to move forward, you're able to submit the application. We go through a process called WEWAC, which is the Water Wastewater Advisory Committee. It's an optional thing for communities, it's not required. But what it is, it's a collection of different entities in the state of Nebraska that can provide similar funding. And we get together once a month and we sit down and talk about the projects that need funding in the state of Nebraska and try to match them with the best financing resource available. And so communities that go through the WEWAC process, they'll get feedback and comments from engineers from both USDA that has a very similar loan program like the SRF does. They have their own set of condition requirements and eligibilities, but it's very similar to the SRF. And then the DEE also will provide comments and feedback to communities on the PER or facility plan. And once that's kind of fine-tuned and developed specific for the community, it moves on to financial subcommittee. And that subcommittee then looks at all the different financing options and tries to get the best match for the community, the one that's going to save them the most money in the long run. And then a letter sent out to the community letting them know all the choices of funding that they have. So it's basically, it's an option to have more available options for a community. Like I said, it's not required, so if the community knows they want to go directly with USDA or directly with SRF, they can bypass this process. But it is an option available to communities out there. So once the application is in, you know the funding source you want to go with, then an environmental review is done. And this is kind of more on the engineering side, but I bring it up in this kind of meeting tonight because what the community might need to know is that community might need to do a public hearing depending on what type of environmental review it is. And sometimes there's a certain time period to allow for comments to come back from stakeholders as the environmental review is sent out for comments and just general notification to the communities. But after that, we can move more into the loan and construction phase. This is the part where the loan starts getting drafted. Project managers work directly with communities, get that loan refined, ready to be signed. And then the construction phase also kind of begins at this step. And so bids go out, construction documents come in. There's a whole bunch of requirements that start falling into place from the SRF, which kind of brings us into that part of things you might see if you go with SRF funding that are a little different than other places of funding. So with SRF, we have some requirements that include possible project sign on a project, Davis-Bacon, which is a wage law requirement, and American Iron, Steel, and BABA requirements. And so these are all kind of things that are unique with SRF and the requirements that come along with our funding. So for the first one is the project sign. Some communities may receive funding, may have to put up a project sign. The purpose of it is to help increase the awareness of communities, let them know what their tax funding dollars are going towards. It depends on the source of the funding, will depend on the type of sign a community has to do. If it's a non-bill, if it's not part of that big financial infrastructure pot of funds that come down, it can be a whole bunch of different options, including electronic sign, physical signs, a whole bunch of different things the community can do with it. They can post it in mailers and send it out with their monthly user bills. It's just kind of a very, very open, way for expressing, information to the community. The new requirements that come with the bill are a physical sign. So if it's communities receiving any sort of bill funding, they will be required to put up a physical sign that has a set design on it, set size, and set number of conditions on it. The good news is that the SRF program, if a sign is required for a community, the SRF will pay for the creation of the sign and pay for the shipping of the sign. All a community has to do is put that sign up at the project site. The other, one of the other gears that we saw earlier was the Davis-Bacon. What this is basically, it's a prevailing wage. It's a minimum wage set by the Department of Labor for projects. So all labor and construction has to meet a specific minimum wage determined by the Department of Labor. That's all this is. That does, like a lot of contractors are well familiar with this, already aware, and they include that in when they know an SRF project is funding something. So usually it's already all taken care of in the estimates. So this is more, one of the things I will point out is that Davis-Bacon usually does require a wage certification, which most of the time is done by a consulting engineer on the project, not always. So I just highlight this to encourage communities that do have SRF to check with their consulting engineer if that's a service they provide. Now the other big things, two big things that are very similar are the American Iron Steel requirements and the Build America, Buy America requirements. These require basically certain components on a project have to be manufactured or made within the United States. American Iron Steel has been around for quite a while now. It's been around since 2014. It's been kind of associated with our funding, so it's kind of well known at this point by suppliers and contractors. This is just kind of all the technical side of the AIS. But some common things you might see that have to be made in America include fire hydrants, tanks, well screens, and different things of that. But usually the big difference here is that these are just products. They're not manufactured goods. This is where, BABA comes in. There are AIS waivers, so a project may fall in, and if something is not available, might be able to get out of it with a waiver. We'll skip over that though and get to that transition into BABA, the Build America, Buy America. This is relatively new. This just kind of came about in 2022. And if American Iron Steel was almost everything but the kitchen sink, this is now the kitchen sink. So this is a requirement saying that all the American Iron Steel has to be made in America, but also all manufactured goods that meet certain conditions have to be made in America as well. And so this can include construction material, including non-ferrous items. And this is kind of a breakdown as to the covered items there. Let's get over this and just kind of get to the examples and related items. So what we might see, in addition to all the AIS components, is you might see now that lumber has to be made in America. That glass or fiber optic cable, non-ferrous metals, and plastic and polymer-based products, if it's manufactured, has to be American or built in America and made in America. And so what this kind of means is that it does mean possible increase in cost for communities out there. There are waivers available, one of them being the adjustment period waiver. There is an amendment to it we're just kind of reading through right now. But these are standing waivers, so if they apply for a project, they can automatically go through. Then also there are project-specific waivers. So if it meets any of these conditions, you can apply for a waiver that way. Kind of more going to be on the end of engineering and deciding what is if it does fall under there. But waivers are possible for both American Iron Steel and BABA. And this is just kind of a side-by-side comparison showing the differences between the two. As I mentioned, the two biggest differences, AIS has been around since 2014, BABA relatively new. The other one I'll point out is who it's overseen by. EPA oversees the American Iron Steel and the interpretation of the law and the requirements of AIS, whereas for BABA, it's now the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. They're the ones who make the regulations and then transfer it down, and EPA interprets that and then transfers it down. So there's another step, there's another kind of entity involved with that. All right, so with the construction phase, there are a couple of things at the very end. Fiscal sustainability plans, just checklist items that need to happen. Nothing, this is more, again, more technical side on the engineering and project manager side. We get then to the end, and when the project is completed, once the project is completed, we call that the IOO. That's just a fancy way of saying project completion. Once the IOO is met, that's when principal repayment phase will most likely start. It's either 1 year after that or 3 years after the loan signing, whichever comes first. But then after that, repayments start. They are done on a biannual payment. They're done in June and December. Once repayments go, we provide a final amortization for communities, and we work with them, as they complete the repayment cycle. And then at the very end here, if any of this is of interest to you and you want more information, this kind of just breaks down everything we just talked about. But there is our email address. It's ndee.wewac@nebraska.gov. That's where you can submit a pre-application form to. then, here we go. This is kind of a list of contacts and resources for communities available to help finance. Many of them are, explaining the rules and regulations that, come with SRF that went over today. Some of them are, assistance and kind of help communities calculate or estimate things and what they need. And then our general email, if you'd like to get in contact with us, it's the ndee.srf@nebraska.gov. And I'll put this last screen up here so Steve gets his up, but this is all the contact informations and all the kind of specialties that we go with. So if you have any questions at all with the SRF and looking for kind of who to contact, this is a good one for that. So before Steve jumps up here, anyone have any questions or anything like that for the general presentation? Yes, sir.
Is your interest rate reduction, your half point, and the loan forgiveness, are those, can you combine those two in an application?
If there's a GPR component, yeah. So, so what happens then is, so if a project implements a green component into their project, we will reduce the interest based on the amount of GPR to the rest of the project. So, if it's a significant amount, it could qualify for up to the full 0.5%, or it might be a blended rate smaller than that. But yes, it would come off of that interest rate. Any other questions? All right, thank you guys very much. I'll turn it over to Steve.
As I'm switching presentations, it was mentioned that beyond working with communities, right now we are also administering under the American Rescue Plan Act funding. Slideshow here. Funding for private well owners. So if you know of anybody who lives on the countryside who has a private well that is tested for nitrates and is above the drinking water standard of 10 parts per million, that individual, that property owner, can receive up to a $4,000 rebate for the installation of a reverse osmosis system. That was funding that was obligated to the department or awarded, allocated to the department by the unicameral. It does have a time frame for use. It must be through an agreement by next June of 2024, with installations completed by September of 2024. So if you know of anybody who lives on the countryside, has a private well, may have nitrates in their private drinking water source, I would suggest that you inform them of this program, direct them to our website. You all being community leaders, unfortunately this program does not apply to you. It can only be for anybody who lives outside of a community setting. You have to have a private well in order to be eligible for that assistance. Some of you may have heard of the lead testing in schools program that has been going on since 2019. As the previous presentation discussed, lead service lines. Now there is funding for lead that is being found in schools across the state, and it is not isolated. We have over 50 school facilities right now, those who participated in those first rounds of testing, that have had detections of lead in different drinking water sources throughout a school facility, whether it be a water fountain, filler station, or just a sink that is used in the kitchen. And what happened with the IIJA bill is that now funding is available not just for the testing, but for, I believe this will work. But for the remediation, for the removal of those appurtenances. And so it's going to be a very quick presentation here about this new grant program that has just started. The eligibility processes, the steps that you have to go through, the requirements, And any questions that you may have, we can say for the end. We're working with the Nebraska Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services. That's primarily to implement the testing side. You'd be doing that through your local health department. We have contracts set up by which if your school facility, if you have a school that hasn't been tested yet, you can reach out to your local health department. They will provide sample test kits to those schools for free. This is also for child care facilities, both private or public. If there is a licensed child care facility in Seward and a residence, that property owner can apply or contact the local health department to get free testing done to see if there's any lead concerns at their own private residence. Wherever there is a child, whether it be a school or a child care facility, we would like to identify where lead is, because now with the funding, what you can see is the number that were identified by what is known in the state as educational service units. So you have all the schools that exist, but above those schools, you have ESUs, which have their own certain number of schools, districts above them. And so through each one of those, we've been identifying those levels that exceed the early action trigger level of 10 parts per billion, as well as those with some very high levels going all the way up to 350 parts per billion. So obviously, getting those levels detected first, contacting, if you have school facilities, you know people in school facilities, please have them reach out to the local public health departments to get the testing done, to get the levels detected. Because after that, we can now begin working with them to develop an estimate through a local plumber, develop a reimbursement grant, have that plumber be then contracted to come out to replace the fixtures, funds are reimbursed, and then we'll follow up again with another round of testing to make sure that we can confirm that the problem has been addressed through that removal and replacement of those lead-containing items. John mentioned on his side that there are different levels of funding and trigger levels. Same here. If you're at 10,000 and below, the facility can more than likely work with a plumber of its choice. If your project estimate is between 10,000 and 100,000, you're gonna have to go through a multi-bid solicitation process, but it can be done informally. And then if you're a school facility and you have a cost of a project greater than $100,000, by state statute, you have to competitively bid that project. There's no way around that state statute requirement. We think the vast majority will be below $100,000. So this requirement should not be too onerous. But the same thing applies. The Build America, Buy America, the manufactured products, the construction materials, the same process of the certification letter that John went through in his presentation. And the one thing that triggers here, if you remember on the other side, is a small project waiver. While we do want to encourage the use of American-made manufactured products on what we fund in this state, if they do become too onerous, we simply would want to remove any lead appurtenances from schools that worry about all of the red tape requirements that come with this program. And so did Congress when they established the project eligibility waivers that apply here as well as the SRF. So where we are first starting off is, again, those faucets, water fountains, and filler stations. What we have seen in schools so far is that is where the vast majority of lead is located. The plumbing that is inside of this building, just like any other large building such as a school, isn't likely lead. You do have lead service lines going into homes, so when we're talking child care facilities, that could be different, especially privately owned ones. But these buildings are generally constructed using cast iron pipe as its internal plumbing and water supply. But the drinking water fountain in a school could be the source of the lead, and removing that fountain will more than likely address the lead issue in the school. What we are prioritizing first is facilities that have children the age 6 and under. We will then come back, if funds remain, and work at facilities with children ages 6 and over. And then should there be funding remaining, we will attack the issue of internal lead plumbing. We have not yet seen that, so we're hopeful that the vast majority of the problem can be in those faucets, fixtures, and fountains. These are the contacts for this program. It's very simple. This is a public health concern. It's our children. This is our future. This is our problem to fix. It's very easy to do. I wish I can find the first so we can go through that effort to show that we can get this problem solved as fast as we can with the money that has been allocated to the state, which is pretty substantial to start. It's $2 million to begin with, and at a cost of anywhere between $3,000 and $5,000 for each one of the appurtenances. We're trying to get as much of this removed from schools, from educational facilities, from child care centers as possible. Do you have any questions on that program? Before I give a verbal-only presentation on the final grant program that is administered by the SRF section in the state. Has anybody heard of the Revitalize Rural Nebraska program? This past session, the unicameral passed into law the ability for the department to provide grant funding to communities to demolish dilapidated commercial properties. We are in internal review right now to launch this program. We have researched and an opinion of what would be best. We are looking at an idea of splitting funding between what the unicameral wanted us to do with these funds, which is assess villages and second-class cities primarily, and if funds remain, first-class cities. Properties need to have been vacated for at least 6 months. They can or maybe will be owned by the community. If they're not, there is a receivership element that exists in state statute. I am not going to go into that. That's going to be probably a little bit challenging. You're going to have to work with an attorney for you to have the legal right to demolish that property as a community. But if the community does own that property, the grant money is provided up front. Essentially, you have 2 years to complete the process. Compared to all of the other programs that we talked here tonight, this is going to be one of the simplest grant programs that I think I ever part of administering. Where you need a picture to show that the property is dilapidated in some state of ruin, and then I'm going to need a picture to show that the property was demolished and you now have a slab of concrete or it's cleared back to dirt. There's no Davis-Bacon requirements. There's no, it's just straightforward. They want the properties demolished. We would also take into consideration potentially whether or not there's a plan to revitalize that location. That information will all be spelled out very soon. We'll be launching that program over the winter. So I would say stay tuned to the press releases that come out of the department. All the information about that program will become available then.
Will that be on your website as well?
Yes, yes. Whenever it's formally launched, links. So if you go to our website right now, you'll find the links to the SRF, the private well reverse osmosis. I'm not sure if we will put this up. We need the rest of the testing done for lead in schools. If it's 50 school facilities, we probably will not put it up on our website. We'll just work with those. But again, I would encourage all of you to contact your local leadership in your school facilities, have them work with their local public health departments to get that free testing done. If it were to grow, we'd probably put this program up on our website too. Any other questions?
Back to the original presentation. How long is a PER good for?
PERs, from a technical standpoint, from a need standpoint, are pretty much forever. It's not as if in 2007 you identified the need to replace a treatment plant, that somehow that treatment plant got better over the last 15 years. The cost information obviously is outdated, and you would need to work with an engineer to bring that cost to current levels to what we're experiencing today with inflation and supply chain issues. But the backbone of that study, we're using studies right now from 2007 to fund projects. Nothing has changed with the need in the community. And so if you do have a water study, it's definitely something that can be used as part of an application process, and all that would be needed is working with an engineer to bring the cost current. As well as that engineer may want to take another look at the particular issue to see if something has changed, what may have been a need 15 years ago could have grown. So it could just be a starting point. But having planning is always worth the effort. Another program that we did not put on any of the slides is not any. We have a working relationship now with an environmental finance senator out of the state of Kansas, the Wichita State University. To some communities, the cost of doing engineering is off-putting. You may not want to spend your own community funds. You're not sure what type of water or wastewater infrastructure problem you may have. There is a group of people who work for Wichita State University, and through a contract with EPA, provide no cost. I think I'll use preliminary planning assistance. They're not going to be able to give you the same service that a consulting engineer in our state, any one of the professionals who are great at helping communities develop projects in the state, identify needs in the state, what they could do is do a preliminary effort at no cost to any village, and then help you decide whether or not you should be working with an engineer, maybe save you some money, pointing out things that maybe aren't major problems, but are minor problems that could be addressed in another manner, or letting you know, yes, that there is a major concern in your community, you should be working with a consultant, and you're not wasting your money to do so, whether it be through planning grants, or through a planning loan, through our program, or any of the planning processes in the state, such as the search grant program through USDA's rural development. If any of your communities want to be considered for that direct assistance, Lisa, her contact information was listed on multiple times during the slides. We can scroll back to one of them, or she'll just give you her phone number right afterwards. We are taking, I think we have 2 for the second year of this program. So there's 2 slots left for that free planning assistance. But there will be 3 more years of that planning assistance, so even if you do not make it in this upcoming year, the following year, more than likely a slot will be available for these university folks to work with you. Lisa is the 3rd from the top. Any other questions? want to thank you all for coming out tonight. I know your private time is, of course, important to everybody. The fact that you all showed interest in being here tonight on behalf of your community and their needs, I appreciate it. This is something that is very important to me, that there's no one way to do any project, but without starting, there is no project. And so being here tonight is a start in some form or fashion to move you all working as leaders in your community to address infrastructure needs. We all get to own the infrastructure that we have in our communities. I live in an SID, I don't live in a village or a city, and anything that is in our SID, I have to work with the people who I live with to get replaced, to get addressed. Something that I do on a local level, I don't have the same concerns that you all have, so I appreciate the fact that you took your time out of your day to come here tonight. And if there's any questions that you have for us, as you're driving home, you can reach back out to us tomorrow and we can start working with you then.
So in our small village, we know that we have to put in water meters. So could we apply for a grant for that, but then we also know we need to do some more infrastructure within? Do we draw on that grant or can you apply for a loan? Can you do both?
So if what we can't describe as every single step, what you're asking towards is to our Title 131 regulations. Any single project that we fund has to meet a certain level of sustainability. That is not a significant bar, but it is a bar that has to be met. What would happen if a community applied just for water meters? The engineering section at the department would review that application and review any of the potential needs that the system has. And so the answer is, if you had no other needs and you wanted to put in just water meters, then yes, we would fund a standalone water meter project. As it was referred to by John, we have numerous communities right now that have administrative orders for nitrates or uranium. And if you are coming into the program for financial assistance and you have that public health need, you'd have to pair those two projects together. We couldn't just fund the water meters. So it just depends upon the specifics of your community.
Because we have high batteries.
And so that's something that would be looked at every project is reviewed on a specific basis by the engineering section. And so it would be in the details of what was submitted for the planning information that was provided. That's the best answer I can give you. It's not a cut and dry yes or no, unfortunately.
So if we submit, we include the study that was done by Jamie Hill, came out, evaluated it, we include that in that.
Yes, I mean, that is definitely the easiest way. If you already have a planning document, provide that with the application, and it gets reviewed by the engineering section. Once it was mentioned in presentation, the steps for clearance, the categorical exclusion, the finding of no significant impact. We've never done an environmental impact statement. In issuing that document, whether it be a CADX or what is known as in the terms of FONSI, that is behind the scenes of that, the engineering section has cleared the project for funding. So we're clearing it for the environmental concerns, we're clearing it for any regulatory concerns, and we're also issuing at the same point in time the funding terms, both loan forgiveness, interest rate, admin fee. We do all in one document at the same time as we provide a clearance for any project that is submitted to the department. Any other questions? If you want to come up to us as we're breaking down and ask us anything rather than on camera, you're more than welcome to. We'll be here until everybody clears out. Thank you all again for showing up tonight.